Hi friends, and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Kristen. I'm the maker of this little corner of the internet, Do So Knits, where I share with you how knitting and other fiber crafts have woven into my life. So today's video is all about my 2025 knitting goals. I've been thinking about these a lot since the year has started, and I'm excited to share them with you today. So I've made a list of 4 2025 knitting goals that I plan to share today. I'm going to keep this a casual video. I'm going to plan to work on some socks while we sit here and chat. So I hope you have something to work on as well, and we'll dive right on in. Before I dive into my 2025 knitting goals, I do want to say a quick thank you to today's video partner, Ana Luisa Jewelry. So Ana Luisa is an amazing jewelry brand that has been my go-to for the past couple of years. They produce high quality, hyperallergenic, water resistant, and sustainable jewelry, all at an affordable price. They have jewelry styles starting at $39, and they offer free shipping within the US. They also have a warranty on their jewelry, which I also think is amazing. It's a 2-year warranty, so if anything happens, you're covered for up to 2 years. Ana Luisa has been my go-to jewelry brand for the previous couple years as I've been trying to up my jewelry game, and that is one of my goals for 2025 as well. Outside of knitting, I'd like to look a little more polished and put together in my working wardrobe when I go into the office, because I do work hybrid. So the days that I go into the office, I'd like to look really put together. So for today's video, Ana Luisa did send me 2 pieces of jewelry to share with you guys today, and I'm excited to talk about them. So the first one is this Pebble mini necklace. It's a simple gold necklace, and it's this little pebble shape. I love that it's not super close to my neck, and the back has 3 extensions, so you can have it tighter or looser depending on how you like to wear your jewelry. I like that this has this really reflective finish on it, so you can kind of see the reflection in it. I think that's pretty cool. And then they also sent me these ash double 2-tone earrings. So these are 2 rectangular type hoops that kind of dangle. These are a little larger than what I would maybe wear on a typical hanging out at home kind of day, but I think for days in the office when I want to, polish up my look a little bit, or on nights when we go out to the symphony or out to dinner, these will be a great option to throw on. So if upping your jewelry game is something that you're interested in doing as well in 2025, Ana Luisa is currently having a 25% off sale if you use my link down in the description box. 2025, 25% off some jewelry. Like I mentioned, they are my go-to jewelry brand because I need something that is hyperallergenic and something that is low maintenance. I rarely take off my jewelry when I take a shower, if ever. So something that is waterproof and isn't going to tarnish or turn green is very important for me. And hyperallergenic, I have to have hyperallergenic jewelry, otherwise I can't wear them. So thank you, Ana Luisa, for partnering with me on today's video. And if you're interested in checking out my link, look down in the description box down below. Alrighty, so we'll get into my kind of goal philosophy, how I kind of think about goals in general. I'm not specifically a New Year's resolution type person. I do see the new year as kind of a fresh start, but it is an arbitrary date. And I know a lot of people fall off their goals in general. And so when I was thinking about these knitting goals, and why it's coming out a little later in January, is I really spent a lot of time thinking about goals that could last the whole year, because that's the other thing with me and goals is sometimes shorter term goals are a little easier to think through in the moment versus a long term, what is a goal that is actually going to last me for an entire year? That's what I think is kind of the tricky part, because I think you can be really inspired and motivated to do something, but then after a while it can feel like a slog to keep up. If it's something that you were really strict with yourself with, or isn't necessarily meeting your long-term goals, it's going to be something harder to keep. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about these goals, and I've come up with 4 knitting goals for 2025 that I would like to share with you all. And these are things that I think I will be able to maintain long term and can kind of adjust as needed. They're not super strict, but they are setting some guidelines for myself for this year to be a more mindful maker. So I do want to mention, in previous years, one of my goals has been to use more stash out, like get more stash out than what I've bringed in. And I've tracked that for the last couple years. And if you saw in a recent video, I'll link it up here as well, but I talk about inventorying my yarn, and I created a stash tracker if you would like to track your stash this year as well. That's linked down in the description box if you'd like a copy of that. So that is something I want to bring into 2025, the idea of mindful making. But I don't do a no buy, and I want to preface this video with that. I don't do no buys. I think no buys are a little too harsh for myself. So with all those precursors, the first goal that I have is to prioritize using my yarn stash over buying new yarn. And I phrased it that way very specifically in order to kind of dive into it, kind of what I mean. And I think that's what kind of gives it a little more flexibility throughout the year. I'm not going into this saying I'm only going to use my stash, that I'm going to do a no buy on new yarn. I think both of those are a little too strict for myself now, and maybe that's something where maybe in February I'm like, wow, I have bought too much yarn. Maybe I'm going to do a no buy for 1 month or a no buy for a quarter. Those are things that could kind of feed into this goal throughout the year. But overall, the 2025 goal is to prioritize using my stash over buying new yarn. Some parameters that I've set for myself about this relate to sock yarn. So in that last video where I inventoried my yarn, I have a lot of sock yarn. It's basically, if you look here, it's 3 cubbies worth plus one of these little baskets at the bottom and leftovers. I have quite a lot of sock yarn. I think it was about a quarter of my stash. It was 100 plus skeins. I want to say it was about 120 skeins of sock yarn. And so that's a lot, because I've kind of moved away from prioritizing socks as well and focusing more on garment knitting. So the fact that I have that much sock yarn, it's going to take me a while to get through all of it. I have a ton. So in the hopes of prioritizing my stash and, you know, limiting new yarn, my goal is to really, I know I mentioned I don't do a no buy, but I'm kind of gonna try to not buy a ton of sock yarn this year. I do get my Woolens and Nosh self-striping club. That's what the sock I'm currently working on is from. It's not a club, but it's from Woolens and Nosh. I love Woolens and Nosh's sock base. That is something I don't have a ton of in my stash. I have a lot of merino and nylon blends, and this is a nice Targhee and nylon blend. It's a little thicker, it's a little more robust. I really like it. So I plan to keep getting that club every month. However, I have a tendency, when you go to a store or a festival or something, it's really easy to just be like, well, I'll just buy 1 skein of sock yarn because they're pretty. You can make a project with 1 skein. And so I've done that for the last couple of years, and I have a lot of them. So I'd like to prioritize using them. The other thing is all these like hand-dyed yarns, I'm really reluctant to knit them into socks. I'm much more likely to use like my Regia or Opal or self-striping yarn that's like made for socks versus some of these other hand-dyeds where I'm like, well, maybe I'll put it into a shawl, or maybe I'll make a muscle burra or something. I like will hold on to them. I'm reluctant to make them into a project. I don't know why. That's something I need to work on. But until I can like get some of those hand-dyed yarns out of my stash, I should slow down on buying them. So that's kind of one way I want to prioritize, is I want to limit the amount of sock yarn that comes in and to, you know, use the sock yarn that I have. The other way that I would like to prioritize using my stash over buying new yarn is a plan, something I've done over the past few years. I mentioned how I've been tracking my stash. I usually track skeins in versus skeins out. And then last year I also tracked grams in versus grams out. Primarily I track skeins in the sense of if it's over here, it's not been used. Once I knit it up into a project and that project is finished, that's a skein out of my stash. So one way that I would like to prioritize my stash. In previous years, I've tried to do an equilibrium or a sense of using more of what I have versus what I bring in, which is what I want to do this year as well. But I want to be a little more strict with myself. Because in previous years, I was just tracking. There was no real guidelines other than like, oh, this is kind of something I want to do. This year, I'd like to use 2x out versus in. And there's a way I plan to kind of implement this. So, as I mentioned, when I track projects, if I'm knitting a sweater, like this, what I'm wearing my staff-in cardigan. If you want more info on that, I'm going to talk about it more in my next podcast. So if you're not subscribed, subscribe so you see that. But I used Lion Brand's Fisherman's Wool for this. So these are really big, hefty skeins. But essentially, if I was tracking this as a project to get skeins out, once I bound it off and it's done, I would count how many skeins I tapped into. So this used 3 skeins of that Lion Brand's Fisherman's Wool. And so I could go to my tracker and say for January, I've gotten 3 skeins out. So if I want to use 2x out versus what I bring in, that would mean I'm now allowed to bring in 1.5 skeins. And that's kind of how I want to implement this throughout the year. As I finish projects, I can count those as skeins out. And I'm going to count it both skeins and grams out. But I find skeins a little easier to track and manage. But grams might be a more, because this was a hefty skein anyway. Like this is like 3 skeins of this was really like 6 of normal skeins, but they're big skeins. So that's kind of what I plan to do. As I finish projects, I'm kind of thinking of it as like a budget almost. If I finish a garment and it gets 7 skeins out, then I've gotten out 7 and I'm allowed to bring in 3. That's my yarn budget for the year so far. I'm allowed to bring in 3 skeins. Now, if I want to go and buy an accessories worth of projects, I could. I could go buy 3 skeins for a cowl. But if I want a garment, then I need to probably finish another one, get some more skeins out. So say I've finished 2 sweaters and I've used 14 skeins now. So now 14 skeins out means I can bring about 7 skeins in. That's about a sweater's quantity, but I've gotten about 2 sweater quantities out. So that's kind of my goal for this. It's a way to kind of, there's been a lot of sales in January. I've been really tempted to bring in some yarn, but I haven't finished any projects this year so far. And if I really want to prioritize using my stash, I really should finish some of these projects. And then once I finish some of these projects, I can look to see, oh, how many skeins have I gotten out? How much am I allowed to bring in? And so this is kind of a rule that I've set for myself. Depending on how the year goes, maybe I'll change that proportion. Maybe 2x. 2x is kind of a stretch for me compared to what I got in and out last year. So maybe I'll change that ratio a little later down. Maybe I want to use 1.5 times out versus in. That might be a little more realistic. Thinking about that now, that might be a little more realistic, but I'd like to start with this 2x. I'll see how it goes. So that's kind of, those are some of the ways I plan to enforce this kind of enforce is kind of strict, but the ways I kind of plan to implement that as a goal. Some structure around the goal itself. And like I mentioned, there may be times a little later where I need to revise it. Maybe 2x is feeling a little too harsh. I can change it to that 1.5 times. But those are kind of the ways I plan to enforce that. So goal number 2 kind of feeds off of goal number 1 and trying to like help keep that one moving along. So goal number 2 is to focus on a handful of knits at a time. The way I'm thinking about this is I really do want to try to keep a handful of whips. I want to try to limit my works in progress to about 5. And the way that I think to structure this is as a sock, something for on the go or meeting knitting, because I knit a lot during meetings, a sweater, a shawl, something small, an accessory, a hat, a scarf, something like, oh, scarf's kind of not small, but you know, mittens, small hats, something small. And that could be like a pattern sock because it kind of doesn't fit into this meeting knitting sock. So a small, and then I have a shawl. And I won't always have a shawl, so sometimes that might be a second sweater. But I did this when I first started my YouTube channel, but it's my 5 S's. So a small, a sweater, a shawl, socks, and then I've lost my train of thought. Socks, sweater, small, shawl. Sock, sweater, small, shawl. Oh, that's 4. So I could have 2 sweaters. But essentially a handful of knits. Sorry, I'm thinking through this as we're going. So socks, small, sweater, shawl. I could have a second sweater, a second small, just a handful of whips. I do have my scrappy blankets as well, so that could count as one of my 5. But with that, I do want to also kind of focus on the Gideon method. If you've seen Knit 365, that's something that they've mentioned and I've tried to implement. And I did it for a while and I've kind of moved away from it. But I do find that really helpful. So with that is you kind of pick a certain amount of time to work on a project, and then once you're done with that time, you move on to the next. And you just kind of cycle through your projects in that way until they're done. And I do like that as a way to, you know, focus, get some projects done. Now, my socks or my on-the-go knitting is I want to purely reserve those for meeting knitting or on-the-go knitting. I want to prioritize my sweaters and my bigger makes this year, but I do want to have socks on the needles in an effort to use my sock yarn and have something simple. It can kind of be a thing if I'm not really feeling the current project that I'm working on. In that Gideon method, I can either go to my socks or I could go to my scrappy blanket as a way to like break up that streak of time that I'm working on a project. Plus, it's just good to have something, for me, small on the needles, because we went to dinner I think it was last month, and I didn't have my project with me. And it's just hard for me. I need to have something for my hands to do. So just having a pair of socks on the needles is a way I can guarantee that, but they don't have to be my focus because Shane and I both have quite a few socks. So in general, they don't need to be the focus. But the way that this is going to feed into that goal 1 is if I'm focusing on only a handful of knits, I can't just have one project going at a time. I do need to be able to jump between, you know, see what's fitting my mood at the time. But if I limit it to 5, and it's really 4 because one of those is socks, if I focus on 4 complicated or larger projects, then I should be able to cycle through those a little bit quicker. And that's not necessarily in a like output, like let me show you what I'm making and I'm making really quickly, but in a way of like, if it's something that I want to knit, it's something I want to wear. I'm definitely a product knitter. I want the item at the end. And so if I can focus on a smaller number of projects, then I'm going to be able to wear them. I'm going to be able to talk about wearing them. And that kind of moves into a goal later down. But focusing on a smaller number of projects should hopefully help me, you know, it'll help me increase that skein out number, which will allow me to buy yarn. That is something that is a motivator for me. I'm sure a lot of us feel that way. Like buying yarn is a different hobby than knitting with it. And I do want to buy yarn. So by focusing on smaller projects and getting projects off my needles, I then allow myself to have a little bit of a yarn budget because of the way I've set it up. And I'll have more products to share, more projects to share, talk about wearing them. And I want to be able to wear them. That's one of the reasons I knit, is I want to use the items that I make. So I just think that'll help me in the sense of, also it'll help prevent me from getting bored. I personally, if a project's on my needles for too long, I get bored with it. So if I can get them on and off a little bit quicker just for myself, it'll probably be a good thing. I'm not saying I'm gonna knit a sweater in a week. That's probably never gonna happen. But I think it will keep my content interesting. I'm not gonna be talking about the same sweater for a very, very, very long time. We'll be able to see progress. We'll get to the finished object. So that's kind of the goal. Focus on a handful of whips at a time. So goal number 3 is kind of still related to this consumption of my stash kind of thing. But goal number 3 is I'd like to actively be using the clubs that I am subscribed to. So as of right now, I am subscribed to 3 fibery related clubs. My first one is my Woolens and Nosh sock club. And I've kind of mentioned before how I kind of want to do that. Keep socks on the needles, limit sock yarn in and out, or sock yarn in, using the sock yarn. But I want to keep that one. Club number 2, I have the Into the World fiber club. So with that, I get 4 ounces of fiber every month. The third club that I'm subscribed to is the Cozy Blue embroidery club. So that one's a little different from knitting, but it still falls under this making goal. So with all of these clubs, what I would like to be doing is have an active project on the needles related to these clubs. And that's in an effort to use them kind of at an equilibrium. Or even just to say like, I am using these clubs that I'm buying. I'm not just buying them and then stashing them away. The one I'm the most guilty of doing that with is the embroidery club. I love the patterns, but I don't always have an embroidery project going. So that's where I want to keep those kind of projects going. I'd like to have a socks on the needles all the time. I'd like to have an embroidery project just going. I don't have to always actively be working on it, but I found I've started one recently, and just having started it, having ironed the fabric and putting it into my little embroidery basket and having that basket by my table where I sit and watch TV, I've been more likely to pull it out. Sometimes my knitting, I'm like, oh, I don't necessarily want to knit right now. I can pull out that embroidery. I've really been enjoying embroidery in an audiobook. So that's kind of just having it going, having it started. You know, sometimes like pushing through that initial barrier is all that it takes in order to have it going. So that's how I plan to have that. And the same with fiber. I want to have a spin actively going all the time. I want to like eliminate that barrier of, you know, I don't have a project started. If I can just have a project started, then it's there for me. And I've done that with some spinning as well. I haven't been spinning every day, but I prepped the fiber, I got it out, my spinning wheel, it's loaded, it's been started. When I finish it, I'll finish it. But just having it actively going is something I'd like to keep as a project. Ideally, I would like to have equilibrium with these projects. I'd like to finish a sock a month or a pair of socks. I'd like to finish an embroidery kit a month. And I'd like to finish around 4 ounces of fiber a month. That's kind of the goal. But initially, just having those projects going all the time is so then that way they're easy to start. If, you know, I'm like, oh, I am feeling spinning. I don't have to like go digging for fiber, figure out what I want to do. Because sometimes that mental barrier is what prevents me from spinning. But right now I already have a spinning project going. When I want to spin, it doesn't take any thought other than plug the machine in and go. If I'm like, oh, I do want to embroider, there's no thought. Which one do I want to do? It's already gone. Previous Kristen has already picked which one we're doing, put it in the basket, and we're good to go. So that's kind of how I'd like to use those clubs every month. So now we're on to my final goal that I've written down for 2025. And so this one is knitting adjacent. It's not directly related to making, although it kind of is. So goal number 4 is I would like to post consistently on both Instagram and YouTube. And now I know there's a lot happening with Instagram right now, but I would like to post progress photos of what I've been working on and videos on a regular basis. So first we'll talk about Instagram, and maybe Instagram becomes BlueSky or another social media platform later down the year. Whatever it is, I just want to post consistently. I've realized over the last year, my knitting Instagram, which if you'd like to follow me is at DoSoKnits. That's where you can find me on Instagram, Ravelry, and YouTube. I've not done a great job of like providing project updates. I was kind of scrolling back through and I was like, I have not done a ton recently. Ideally, what I would like to do is I'd like to share current WIP progress, you know, show some milestones when I'm getting to them, share what I'm making in the moment, and also share wearing my project. So there's kind of twofold what I'd like to do. So with the Instagram and sharing progress photos, one way that I think will be helpful with that, I have a couple ideas of how I'd like to implement that. And one I think is if I do use that Gideon method where I work on a project for 4 hours, after that 4 hours is up, I can take a quick photo and share the progress of my project. The other way I think I can do that is I think I'm probably just gonna batch some photos on a weekend. So on Sundays or Saturdays, whatever day, I'm gonna take all my projects out. I'm gonna set up a little photo shoot area. I'm gonna take the photos. I'm gonna get the photos done. I'm gonna see which ones look the best. If I need to do a little editing, I can. I do it in Lightroom. And then I can either schedule them with later to post them throughout the week, because obviously I don't want to post like 10 photos on one day. That's a lot to consume. But those are kind of ways I think I'd like to post a little more consistently. Just post what I've been working on. The other thing that I would like to do is I'd like to share more of the projects that I'm wearing. One, when I finish them, like I have finished this staffing cardigan and I've still not taken photos. Sometimes it's just a little bit of a barrier to get photos taken because some days I'm lazy. And since I work from home all the time, I don't always, you know, put on like photogenic clothes. So I'd like to be a little bit better about just like cataloging what I'm wearing. And that just might be within my Instagram stories. Maybe I'll just take a quick photo of like, this is what I'm wearing today. And then I can tag and share you what I'm working on. I'd also like to do that in a way to reflect on projects I am wearing and then see what projects am I not wearing? Why am I not wearing them? And then that'll help inform some of these other projects that I'd like to make in the future. So those are the ways I'd like to share a little bit more on social media. So then when it comes to YouTube, I'd like to post consistently on there as well. So what I've currently moved down to, I've moved down to doing one podcast episode a month, which I have found very helpful in the sense of not feeling like I'm saying the exact same things every video. Also with my full-time job, dedicating a weekend to podcast posting is more manageable than every other week. Also, what this opens up is I would like to post 2 videos a month. Ideally. However, it doesn't have to be every video has to be a podcast. I'd like to be able to follow some creative aspirations outside of a typical sit-down podcast, what I'm working on, what I've finished. Things like this, a goals video. Now, with this, I've thought of some ideas. I'd like to talk quarterly about my seasonal knitting plans. In that last video that I made, I know I've mentioned it a few times, but I organized my queue for this year seasonally. So I'd like to, at the beginning of every season, reassess what I've put in those seasons. Do I still want to focus on those? Do I want to move some projects around? So I'd like to focus on some, you know, season project plans for knitting goals, videos like that. I do think videos related to productivity, planning, those kind of videos do interest me. So if you have any ideas of types of videos that you'd like to see, outside of podcast videos. I'd love to hear them. I'm always looking for more ideas because it can take a lot of energy to think of these things. But that's where I think doing podcasts a little less often, once a month, you should still be able to see the projects that I'm working on. But that's where I think, as I've not showing as frequent progress in podcast videos or videos, that's where I think posting on social media a little bit more, showing progress updates, I'm hoping I can equalize those out a little bit to keep you updated of what I'm working on throughout the process a little bit more. And then one other question I have related to social media is short form videos, reels, small videos, YouTube shorts. Are those things that you like to watch? Is that something I should be exploring as well? Or do you prefer just quick photos, little project updates? Or do you like when people sit down and talk to you like, oh, this is my sock, I've been working on it, this is the progress I've made this week? What's more interesting? What's more engaging? I'd love to know what you think. Obviously, the algorithms are pushing the videos, but I want to engage in how people like to engage. Those are all the goals that I have for 2025. 3 of them kind of related to project planning, stash consumption, project focuses, I would say, are kind of those main 3. So with the first one being prioritize using my yarn stash over buying new yarn. The second goal being focusing on a handful of whips at a time. Goal 3, actively be using the clubs that I am subscribed to. And 4, posting consistently on Instagram, social media, and YouTube. Those are my 2025 knitting goals. I'd love to know what you think of these goals. Are these goals that you plan to kind of implement in 2025, or do you have other goals? I spent a lot of time thinking about these, and I'd love to know other knitting goals as well. And that's where I think if these are my main goals, I can do smaller goals throughout each quarter or each season to push toward these goals. So that is kind of my plan for the year, but I'd love to know other goals. Maybe there's something I haven't thought of that I should be thinking of. I'd love to know. Let me know down below in the comments. I do love to read them and respond. And as always, I'd like to thank you for spending time with me this year. Don't forget to check out Ana Luisa and their 25% off jewelry for 2025. Link is down in the description box. Thank you again, Ana Luisa, for partnering with me on today's video. Thank you, viewer, for hanging out with me today. I hope this gave you a little bit of an inspiration. Hope you got a little bit of knitting done or making done while hanging out today. And I'll hopefully see you again in the next video.